I come, I feel like deep into between Harlan and Copeland in terms of how the idea of Copeland, the idea of Harlan, how it reaches inspiration to the entire Black and African world. We've got politics, prejudice, respect. It's very important to have different perspectives, and it's very important to create perspective.
This is a meal to bring our people together in celebration of resilience in diaspora. These are dishes to keep our communities and our histories alive.
Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is SiouxBean. I'm here to talk to you about food, clay, and all the things that interline in between those. I come from making something out of nothing, which is many things that you'll find artists and potters align, craftspeople, and the people that I akin myself with a lot, food and beverage industry, find very clear with what we do in our lives. Making something out of nothing is very specific to what we do in the ways of finding a base object, seeing its potential, and finding where we can find the intersections between our own personal practice and the medium that's set for us. When I first got started in this whole game, I looked at clay as a vehicle for social engagement, an area for us to be able to find ways to interconnect through culture, through craft, through our own medium, within multiple levels. Coming from the beginning, very humble means, I found my ways through craft and through ceramic art, within the food industry as well as within the craft industry. When I first started out in this game, I didn't know what I was going to do. I found ceramics very early in my age. I was very lucky. I found it in a high school program. I was able to make what I wanted to make out of the things that were appearing in my head. My early idea of what art was when I first started out were things in the second dimension. I had only graffiti and film and things that I thought were in the fine arts realms were out of my reach. I was very lucky at a young age to be able to find the craft medium of clay, excuse me, and be able to build the things that I wanted to out of my mind that were there, that I couldn't do in the second dimension. As I came up through high school, I was able to be fostered and garnished by various people in that community that wanted to see me thrive, that wanted to see somebody from humble means become a little bit more. As I came up through the ranks of learning various types of craft disciplines, from studio potter to paint your own pottery shop tech to teacher's assistant, I began to gain knowledge and gain various ideas of what art was. Coupled with that same time, I was bringing myself up through the food industry, learning ways to make a life for myself as a dishwasher, as a host, as a busser, as a bartender. As I came up through those, various things started to intertwine. I started to realize that in the same ways that I wanted to hang a show and see that from the moment somebody walked through the threshold that I was in charge of every single one of those ideas that came through their head, every single avenue that they looked at. It was almost the same way that I presented food to somebody when they walked in the restaurant. I knew that the moment that they walked in through that threshold, I owned that experience and I was in charge of that experience. And that was very gratifying and very powerful for me. As I started to be fostered within those realms and come up through the ranks of the food industry as well, I had people address the certain situations that I was in. And they kept saying to me, why aren't you making plates? Why aren't you making bowls? You know, why aren't you making pans? You cook all this beautiful food, you should be making pedestals to put on this food. For whatever reason, I couldn't understand what they were talking about. I said, I don't know what you're talking about, I'm a sculptor. I have no idea. I don't make plates, I don't make bowls. It took a minute for me to realize that a plate and a bowl was another sense of sculpture, was another way or facet for me to reach a broader audience, for me to intertwine within everybody's sort of being and interaction. Once I was able to grab onto that sort of aspect, then the world opened up to me. It was a broader sort of sense of the thing. I was able to use clay, use food, and the idea of my canvas being the room that I was in and not just a single wall or a single piece of fabric. It was the bigger sense of what was going on. Could I then use clay and food and the room that was given to me as vehicles for me to create community engagement? Was I able to then use these mediums to invoke a larger conversation? And that's really where I found that making something out of nothing was very pivotal for what I wanted to do, because those things didn't exist within that area. So I needed to make it. I needed to make the plates, I needed to make the room, and I needed to make the food in order to engage a larger audience so that we could have a bigger conversation. As I started to do these things, I came up through the years, worked in various areas, out here in the Bay Area, Michelin star restaurants, worked for various artists, studio assistants, started to gather more and more and more knowledge about what these mediums that I was doing and how they interacted and how they intersected. And I started to see that the same ideas within clay and the same ideas within food existed as parallels, but I just needed to bridge that gap as much as I can. I began burying seeds into plates at that moment. I wanted to share my family's deepest roots with a larger audience. I wanted to slim that down. I was going from making pop-up restaurants to catering events to radical types of food and beverage types of performances. But in the end, I really needed to simple that down to a single story, but not make it my only story. We don't want to get into an area where we're really focused on one single story, because there is a danger in that single story. But me telling you mine, hopefully opens up a bigger world for the whole thing. So I began to research within recipes in my family that were things that were of significance. And I found that we had a base red sauce. We had a chili pepper sauce that we used for all of our stuff: mole, tamales, menudo, everything. But it was one type of red sauce that we used all the way across the board. And I asked my grandma, I said, hey, what's the recipe to this sauce? We went in, we started making it. She said, a couple of those chilies, a couple of those, and a couple of those. And I was like, okay, 3 or 4 of these. She's like, well, let's taste it. I said, okay, 3 or 4 of these. She said, well, let's taste it. As we went on, I began to find out that there was no base recipe. It was actually a conglomerate of all the things that she had learned over the years, which was really shocking to me because I was expecting to find a lineage to pass down. And when I found that the lineage was something that she transformed and moved into herself, that she was proud of to transform and transfer down, I felt a lot of power to that. And I wanted to share that with everybody else in the world. So I took that recipe, be it as ambiguous as it was, and I grabbed those peppers and I buried those seeds in the only thing that I knew that was the strongest and powerfulness medium in my life, and it was clay. So I buried those seeds into clay plates, and I molded them, and I rolled corn across the top because corn was so powerful and existed in all of our cultures. And I fed them. I fed them to people. I decided not to fire them. I decided that firing the work was something that took it past the meaning of what it was. And I wanted to make sure that those seeds that I embedded in that plate transferred across as far as they could go. I come from a community in the Northern California area, in the lower Central Valley, Bakersfield and Sacramento. We're a very farm-heavy community. We're a community where we celebrate our farmers as rock stars almost, as well as our chefs. And there are hard juxtapositions in that line where certain people in the world or companies, they own seeds. They own the right to grow, which is not particularly right, I find, and it doesn't sit well with me. So in the punk rock fashion that I was raised in, I wanted to make sure that those seeds got spread out as far as they could. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't fire the plates as well. Then I started to think to myself, well, what am I going to serve on these plates? I have the seeds buried. I have them in raw clay plates. I have them sealed with wax so we can put something on top of them, but they can't eat it. What are we going to ingest now? So then I had to really start to think, well, why am I here? What am I doing? And I investigated farther. My grandmother is a migrant that comes from Indigenous Texas, Indigenous Mexico from Texas, came over here in the Depression to work the fields. I am half Filipino, who also has a very strong lineage in migrant farm and field working in the lower Central Valley. And so I started to research further. What are the reasons why we were here? Picking fruit, picking commodity. That was why my family was here. Those are the reasons why I was born. People needed food. So I said, well, what are the highest parts of labor commodities in California? Carrots, celery, apples, citrus. This was crazy to me. These are the major components in every restaurant. Celery, carrots. These are bases for what we call mirepoix, a stock that we cook in every single thing across the board. How are these the highest labor commodities? Citrus, every single bar drink you order, it's got a little lemon wedge in there. How are these the most hand-touched items? So then I started to ask people, do you realize that it takes 5 to 10 people to grab that apple before it gets to your plate? No, I had no idea. Can I get a Sprite? That was mostly what I got from most of the people. So then I said, well, I'm going to use the platforms that I have. I have voice when it comes to a food community, and I can talk to them about clay. And I have voice when it comes to an arts and ceramics community, and I can start to talk to them about food. And when I brought those two things together, that was a really pivotal moment. And within the growth of those two ideas, as I started to work and maneuver through, I came up with the idea to open a place called Seed. Seed is a venue. Seed is a vessel, might I say. Seed is a vessel for conversation. In a short, Seed is a ceramic studio. It's a place where people make things out of clay. But I wanted it to be a little bit bigger than that. In the same sort of punk rock status, I wanted to make sure that it was pushing the bounds of hard conversation. I wanted to make sure that when I opened a studio, that it wasn't based on a profits and loss, but it was based on a conversation. That when we came in, we weren't the ones that looked like me that were asked to turn the radio down. I wanted to make sure that I opened up a place where people could freely have thoughts and focus on what they wanted and what they wanted to challenge. And I didn't want to open a place that had funneled needs. So within that, we opened Seed. We started it a little while ago. It's been a beautiful thing. It's been a beautiful thing. Main focus of Seed was to initiate conversation, to start something radical, and to be able to facilitate a vessel that could hold something greater. My work exists on a general bigger playing field, and people will ask, well, what kind of work do you do? Or is it sculpture? Is it functional? What is Seed? Seed exists to me as a sculpture within itself. In the same way that we add and we retract when we make sculpture, I presented that way with the same way that I made Seed. I tried to add and subtract to the curriculum to make sure that we were talking about the stuff that we wanted to talk about. I added and subtracted to the vibes, to the music, to the scene, to make sure that it was presenting a comfortable area so that people that looked like me felt good about the areas that they were creating in. And I wanted to make sure that it was enough of a place that invoked idea, spirit, culture, community, and a little bit of culinary vibe on top. It was a good thing. It was a good thing for sure. Outside of that, I've been doing my best to make as much work as I can to mimic all of the best things in my life: play, community, culture, and a little bit of craft. I appreciate all your guys' time, most definitely. I'm gonna chop up a little bit of stuff for you real quick. See where it's at. Now, in earlier times, I would have everybody come in and take a plate, scoop up some of this salad, taste the flavors of labor, and then break the plate to hopefully exude that energy out, whether it be cathartic for you, whether it be a moment that significates something in history for you, or in this moment now that hopefully lets you grab on to one or maybe two nuggets of information that we had. And in the end, those are the only things that I could ask by the end, is that one item becomes apparent and sticks in your head through a visceral and final act. Thank you.